Okay, so beyond the basics, right? So I guess what are the basics? And when I say basics, I mean essentially using it to just just using a sort of regular old workflow, maybe yeah, none of the pro stuff basically. Um, so yeah, so that's the idea of basic, I suppose. Going a little bit beyond that, I feel like it's pretty well documented, but there's some things where you're not quite sure if they are possible, etc. And so maybe I'll save you some of the figuring out there. So I'd say like in terms of use cases and stuff, a lot of us probably work with a transactional application, right? You have a database, and most of the time you kind of aim to, guarantee consistency and that kind of thing. Yeah, just serve a web app or an API or something. So I would say the picture looks something like this. You basically you have some data, you make a change, and then maybe you have dependencies where you've got to sort of update the data there too, and maybe you have transitive dependencies, and you kind of put them all in a transaction, and that's more or less how you guarantee some consistency. Where I currently work at Bramble, we do a data warehouse product, and so we sort of have an analytical part to our application as well, and so that looks a bit more like this, where you have the transactional part, which is sort of thing we're all familiar with, day to day probably, and then you have the analytical part, which is more tailored to querying and reading the data. Yeah, so basically you kind of reshape your data so that you can query it more easily, filter it, chart it nicely. Yeah, and you've got the ETL in the middle, and those can be pretty big, hefty queries. So we use O-band there to kind of bridge the gap basically, move things over. Sometimes periodically, sometimes just when data comes in. Cool. Yeah. Okay. So I basically said all of this. Transactional stuff is basically, in our app, it's basically there to, get data in. It's about, forms through a live view, that kind of thing. Make sure it actually makes sense. So consistency checking is there. The model is really important. And then, yeah, like I said, the analytical part is basically, a different database, still Postgres, obviously. Yeah, it's much more tailored to reading and query. Cool. Okay, so I'll walk you through the chart, which you can hardly see because the screen is tiny. But say you've got a change come in, right? So actually, if I go back, I've got these labeled as sort of direct dependencies in the analytical part, and then sort of transitive ones. And so we had this use case where you'd basically change a small number basically in one part of the app, and it would affect like 7+ metrics we had to kind of alter. Some of them were transitive, some of them were just sort of direct. And if you make it over like a huge time span, what you absolutely don't want is to like spin a job, get a job running that will basically do the whole time frame, like of months perhaps, right? And then mess up, and then you end up with a big hole in your data that's however long that period was. So at the same time, you've got a really big time frame, and you've got a bunch of different data you have to sort of modify in different ways, so different queries, different ETLs. And so there's basically a worker or a job for each of those. And so to sort of reduce the blast radius of the failure, what we did was use an O-band batch, right? So the way we do that is basically take the whole time frame and just go day by day through it, so that we kind of minimize any failure to a day, possibly, and then just basically run each ETL, day by day, that way. And so what we kind of ended up with was basically a batch of O-band batches, and yeah, and so that basically sort of helped us. Well, okay, here's the code. I suppose it's pretty common. You have something coming in. You basically, maybe you make a multi or another transaction, and you do some work before and after, and then you got the batch of jobs, sort of kick off somewhere in between. So pretty familiar there. The really good stuff is here, which you can definitely not read. So let's just and make it a tiny bit bigger, actually. Okay, that's good. All right, so yeah, so basically, yeah, we zip through day by day, basically. We build an ID that includes sort of the item we're changing, right, and the day to get that sort of batch ID nice and unique. And then we have our heterogeneous sort of selection of jobs, right? So yeah, we've got 2 workers for the direct dependencies, 3 for the transitive ones. And and you can actually go ahead, use the batch ID we built earlier to kind of collectively call them a batch, basically. Stick those jobs in there with Oban's new batch. So that's sort of somewhat documented, at least in the version of the documentation I read. But how to do this exact thing wasn't, so wasn't even sure it was possible. But then basically you can actually flatten it on a sort of day-to-day basis, and then insert them all at once. So sort of pretty important, because what we were trying to do is basically guarantee some transactionality to our analytical data. As many guarantees as possible. So being able to insert them all at once is kind of important. Being able to actually have distinct batches, so that if a single day goes wrong, then we can go and fix that single day, or have some traceability so that we know that day went wrong, fix that particular day. Yep. Okay. So does anyone want me to zip through that before I leave this page again? I guess not. Okay. So yeah, what did that give us? Basically, if a user was going to change, that number basically, and it would have this pretty big effect, we were able to give them like a notification, that work was in progress. So for a fraction of time, they would see some, a big gap in the data, or it wouldn't update, for example, and we were able to tell them when it was complete as well. Or in theory, we could have done that. We haven't yet. Yeah, we were able to minimize the blast radius, which is, absolutely, critical. It's all, our app is basically all about the data we display. So if there's a huge hole in it, then that's a big problem for us. And of course, like technically speaking, we had, different kinds of jobs going in there. So if you look at the sort of batch documentation, it's sort of, you can't really tell if you can in fact put different kinds of job in there, or if you can just sort of the same kind of job, but you can. And obviously you can have sort of an arbitrary number of them as well. So yeah, there we have it. Next up, so this is another use case we had at Bramble, but I feel like it's a little difficult to explain. So the best sort of analog that we're probably all familiar with is a CI pipeline, right? And I've seen that kind of thing modeled really frequently as a finite state machine. But you kind of you see pretty clearly straight away that there's something wrong with that model, because okay, everything can be modeled as a finite state machine, but it's not really expressive, right? So it's like you've got a handful of states, and then each of them connects to another state, as in it just every state basically branches out to every other state. So it's like you may as well not have this finite state machine, because the transitions are totally unclear. And so actually what this thing is basically, it's just like a succession of things that you basically try again and again, right? So if you were to model it as a finite state machine, you basically, a lot of the time I see it done as any of these states basically can go back to the original starting state, right? But I feel like it's pretty meaningless model. So it's better to just think of it like just the fact that a sort of model where you retry the same thing over and over again. You make some change in between every time, right? like maybe you push something out, and you get your test running, you get your linter running or whatever, and every change you're basically doing that run through the whole thing over and over again, and obviously there's some subtle kind of points there where you can simply retry at a certain step, right? So if you have a flaky test, then retrying a step is obviously it's different from actually retrying the whole pipeline, right? But more or less, I think it's much better to model it as just a succession of things you have to do, and so let's just check my notes. And so I have another example before I go into the tech. So I did a similar scenario in a bank I worked at once, where basically, like I guess most of us have probably used Revolut at this point. And when you do your onboarding, you basically have, they collect your details and stuff like that, but you also go through know your customer processes where, you hand over your ID or a picture of it, you take a stupid photo of yourself. It's like awkward kind of selfie, right? And and then that goes off to a third party. Always, you have to kind of like sign this declaration saying you're okay with them, doing their thing. And then behind the scenes, they'll collect the proof, they'll check it, and they'll kind of say yes, you are who you say you are or not. The bank will store like basically a receipt because they need that legally, and then they might open you the account. So I had to code this up once at a bank, and it's basically the same thing ish. It's a pipeline, right? So it's a really sort of simple linear workflow. Either the step works or it doesn't. And I'd kind of say the sort of idea of using a finite state machine here just doesn't quite simplify things. Yep. So the use case for this that we have at Bramble is a lot of our data, not all of it, but a lot of it comes from like outside systems. So that could be like a CSV file, and we basically have to turn that into JSON and hit our internal API with that, or a stream, and then again, use our internal APIs to kind of push it into our system. So yeah, like at a high level, it's basically a simple, turn CSV into JSON, but we have to make it robust because, I guess, a bunch of things can go wrong basically. And there's definitely some transformation, some formatting and things like that to do. But the really big one is that, you have like a handful of systems. Each of them uses like a different ID for every user, for every task, for every whatever, for every item out there, right? And then you have your own internal IDs. And so now you have to have this mapping between external to internal for like, people, teams, every metric you have. And we have a user interface that helps our product people kind of collect that and update that and things like that. But sometimes they will just be wrong, as in what comes in through the file or whatever is just not, or maybe we just haven't collected those external IDs yet. We haven't mapped them, and so what I'm trying to say, I guess, is that in the beginning stages of onboarding a customer, we need to kind of do that mapping, and then sort of intermittently, as we kind of bring more of their people onto our system, or more of their work onto our system, we have to update those. So there's basically like outside sort of intervention that needs to happen. So with a sort of CI pipeline, you basically either have to push new code to get it to like run across the pipeline further, or something like that. And here you basically have to update IDs and things like that, mappings. So yeah, the answer is basically the chain worker with Oban Pro. And recently, I think the RC, so the release candidate, that's sort of out now. There's no chain worker anymore. It's just the regular pro worker, and you can just kind of use it in the same way. But yeah, so that's changing. But there's still a sort of kind of chain functionality there. It's just in a different place. And so, yeah, what that does is basically you can use that to just basically declare like a sequence of steps, including ones that need outside intervention. So things like, you know, maybe you're waiting to poll for something or a webhook or something like that. And so yeah, you can. That's what you should use basically. Cool. Let's see. So. Yeah, I had like a few sort of operational thoughts on all of this stuff. So, I mean, there's this sort of like when you're looking at the architectural design of your system, right? There's this difference between, you know, your control flow, your data flow, your kind of, and basically with Oban, you have to use IDs basically when you're sort of setting up a job, right? You can't actually, you probably shouldn't actually throw like data proper into a job when you kick it off, just because doing that with args is awkward. I'm not even sure how much data you can actually pack into an Oban, you know, job. And so it's really sort of control centric, right? You basically tell it what it needs to do, and then just pass it the IDs that it needs to do that work on. Whereas the sort of Kafka and Redis, you like conceivably, I mean, definitely like Kafka is sort of all about like actually throwing data into it and you know, pulling all the data you possibly need into it, you know, putting it onto a queue and basically, okay, it's not a queue, but putting that into Kafka and then basically actually using it to do data processing, like proper. And then I would say RabbitMQ is basically, like historically, it was somewhere in between. You could do both. You could do, you know, whatever you wanted, I suppose.
No.
Why not?
Rabbit has a hard limit on message size.
Okay, but these days it doesn't, right? Because you can it has streams now. So, okay, that's why it says historic. Okay, fine. But still, I said in between, so yeah, okay, cool. Yeah, okay, the other interesting thing is at Bramble, I feel like Oban is fine because it's pretty simple, right? All we're doing is using it for ETLs, so there's not like a huge distributed system or even like a handful of services that we really have to worry about. It's just, you know, get something running, sort of make sure it works reliably or happens sort of robustly. Whereas if you had like a slightly more involved system where you had a handful of services, maybe things like spikes in usage, which, you know, at Bramble are totally, I'd say it's pretty predictable. But if you have, you know, if you're maybe, you know, definitely at a bank, right, or a fintech or something, I think you need to be a bit more careful in terms of sort of like overall system design. And with Rabbit, at least, there's some back pressure that is applied, right? So if a consumer just can't like, oh, damn, I should not do that with a microphone, sorry. Like if a consumer just can't like pull enough out of you know, a lot out of a queue, it'll kind of back, you know, just via like acknowledgement and rate limiting on the sort of broker producer side of things, it will rate limit the producer a little bit so that you can actually, you know, not overwhelm, you know, your broker and your, you know, basically your consumers and things like that, and just basically push back a bit more on the on the producing side of things. So yeah, that's important if you have, you know, a different kind of workload. Yeah, so I think obviously, like sort of like code always comes down to basically what you want to do, right? Your application basically, what you want to get done, and then it comes down to like how you're going to do that as well, right? Your stack. So it's sort of like you've got to marry those two, right? Always. So first you got to know what you want, get that clear, and I think that's basically my big point with the kind of whether or not you use a sort of like simple linear succession of steps for something that's like a CI pipeline or KYC processes or whatever, right? As opposed to a state machine, and then ultimately, ultimately you can then actually, go to your framework or whatever, and just actually apply the piece of it that makes most sense, right? So, yeah. Yeah, that's it. Thanks. Yeah, questions? Shimon?
Are there any guarantees across new batch from Oban, like one job fails, that just one is restarted, or is there anything more to that?
So all the jobs inside a batch run sort of independently, right? If one fails, or whichever ones fail, they'll be retried. Right. Yeah, it's just grouping, and you can get basically a bunch of callbacks to say, they all completed successfully.
Okay.
And so you can say, the whole thing completed successfully, and maybe tell that to your user, right? Yeah.
So what are the nice parts of OpenPro that are worth paying for?
I mean, definitely the batch, right? We needed that.
Okay, so that's
And actually it was, sorry, yeah, that's only in Pro. And we actually, for a long time in our main application, we were using the free version. Other parts of, other sort of repositories, other projects were using Pro. And we had just switched over to using Pro on the app as well, which was, I needed that basically the day after we migrated. Yeah.
Is there any kind of graphical interface or anything like this that only comes with the Pro version?
Yes.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more, watch my presentation from Lisbon, shameless plug.
But now I think the web app is, Open Web is going to be like,
It's open source.
it's open source already. Okay, cool. Yeah, but I think the web, like the web UI doesn't give you a lot of, at least the version we're using didn't really give you a lot of like batch specific like data in the UI. Yeah.
I'm wondering because
It was pretty generic.
Seems to be kind of a blast from the past. So a piece of software that has some free version, but also when you buy the license, you actually you get more of an API that's hidden behind the license. There is nothing really more than that. No, and
Yeah.
user-friendly user interface or such. It's just more logic, more functionality, but pretty useful functionality, which is kind of on the contrary to let's say the general free
Yeah.
source ecosystem.
I mean, I would.
And it seems to be successful. Maybe that's the bit I didn't mention.
Okay, yeah. What, you were going to say something?
I was saying that you get a totally different Oban with Pro. You get a different different execution engine, different API, different modules even. Like when you are switching from normal Oban free version to Pro, you are totally discarding everything that's free, and you get a different, more powerful version. It's like you get the cheapest Skoda with 1.0 engine, and then you get a Skoda Loin and Clement with 300 horsepower. Like,
Okay.
I wouldn't compare the two because, like, for example, Oban Pro you can define jobs with annotation. And
Okay, so even the API, the basic API you use is completely different.
Yes.
Well,
Okay,
what are you
that-
talking about? The API is the same, right?
Okay,
Right.
you can use the same API,
Yeah.
but the Oban Pro comes with totally different API if you want to use it.
Right, yeah. Yep. I would say
But the execution engine is different.
as well.
Okay.
Yeah. I think a lot of that stuff is useful. Whether or not you can build it on top of the free subscription, I don't know if I would try. Cool.
One
Yeah.
last comment, I think you also get back pressure, implicit one with queue lengths. and
Yeah, you.
database pool. You can control.
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
so
you-
that's explicit.
That's true, but it's not the same, right? Because this is gonna sort of it reaches the queue, and that's the extent of it, right? Whereas if you actually want to push back on the producer, you can't. You know what I'm saying? Like you can't stop it from.
Producing jobs.
Yeah, like if something goes horribly wrong, you can't say something's gone bad. Like I just want to stop putting things in the data, queuing them up. You queued up a bunch of rubbish that's just gonna,
Okay.
yeah, cool.